Good morning and welcome to Church at Home with Rachael for Friday the 4th of February. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the importance of our newspapers, of our journalists, and the idea that journalism is a standard. Journalism at its best is a standard to which the rest of society should elevate ourselves. I know there's all kinds of print media and video media out there that really doesn't hold itself to any kind of standard at all. But there are probably thousands across North America, thousands of small newspapers and radio stations and places like that, where the people who are contributing members, contributing articles and segments and things like that, really do try hard to use integrity and faithfulness and good journalistic practices of discovering the truth and trying to present ideas in a factual way that doesn't lean one way or the other. Or if they do, if it's an editorial comment, to be again, make sure you have your facts straight, but also to be able to present their ways in ways that are not inflammatory. I was reading the paper last week, and I hadn't read the one from the week before. I had saved it on my desk, and I hadn't read it yet. And so I have here a copy of The Edge. This is the local paper for Wainwright and the MD of Wainwright, and it is produced by the Holmes family and their staff, and Roger and Phyllis, and they're fantastic people who do a wonderful job of keeping the community up to date with what's going on, both in our local community, but also in the greater parts of the world. And every week, Roger has, the editor has an editorial along with Aaron and Zach. And they talk about great things. Like today, this one from the 21st of January, Roger's is Stop the Olympics. Zach's is the local library. And Aaron's is Skinner Boxing. And they're all, they're not very long articles, but they present an idea from one particular perspective that is intended to make people think. And it would appear that an article that I didn't see, an editorial that I didn't happen to read from probably a week or two before this, apparently struck a nerve with someone, because this lady has sent in a letter to the editor, speaking to Roger about his recent article, and she says she begins it by saying, "Your recent opinion article left me with a feeling of total disgust for our news media's lack of research and knowledge about subjects on which they comment. Regardless of whether we are vaxxed or unvaxxed, we should all be concerned with the language you used and the message you have conveyed." The article or the letter to the editor goes on, and it's fairly biting, and she writes very strongly about her opinions, and regardless of how you stand about vax or unvax or liberal or conservative or anything like that, one of the things I really appreciate is the fact that when that letter to the editor came in, obviously denouncing Roger's editorial, his opinion piece, he didn't bypass it. He put it in the paper, up close to the beginning of the paper where people could read it, and it's printed. Appears to be printed in its entirety, and there's no comment, and he simply presented this as a letter that someone wrote in response to something that he wrote. And there's something we need to learn here from Roger as the editor, but also from all journalistic pieces and all media pieces that try to hold that balance of recognizing that if we present our opinion out there, we need to do so from a place of knowledge. We need to have done our research. And I know Roger, and I do believe that his article would have been researched and well presented. So I would beg to differ with the woman who wrote the article. But what really astounds me and amazes me is that in today's world, where the media has become suspect at times, and we're throwing around things like fake news, because to be quite frank, there are people out there, outlets and internet sites that deliberately misrepresent the truth and do send out fake news and then call all the real news fake news. There are people who do that. But in this day and age when it would be so much easier for people to just give up the fight and say, whatever, I'm done, we have people like papers like The Edge who do their best to present what is important to the community in a manner that is even-handed, that is educated and researched, and presented with integrity. Roger didn't have to publish that letter to the editor. Nobody but the woman and a few people she told would probably ever know that she ever wrote the letter to the editor if it hadn't shown up. And yet he produced it, he published it for all of the readership to see that someone else had a differing opinion and it was presented in the paper. That warms my heart. I am so glad to know that in a world in which the local paper is fighting hard to stay open, is fighting hard to be able to continue to be the voice of the people, to the people in a community, that we have integrity in that. And my hunch is that for the bulk of these small papers, these small town media outlets, my sense is that they're probably doing the same thing, presenting the information to the world that needs to be presented in a way that speaks of integrity and truth and the importance of sharing community news. It isn't always the case that integrity leads the day. It isn't always the case that someone does the right thing, like publishing that letter to the editor, when they could probably get away with not doing it. It speaks volumes when someone chooses to do the right thing, when someone chooses to live with integrity, when someone chooses to serve their community to the best of their ability without getting personal gain for it. That is what I think it is to be a Canadian. That is what I think when I think journalism. That the person who is writing the article has researched it, has taken a decision about how they're going to approach that article, and presents the information in such a way that it is truthful, straightforward, hopefully engaging and challenging. If everything we read in papers like The Edge and the small town newspapers across this country were things that made us pat ourselves on the back and feel good about everything we already think and just affirm what we already think, then what would be the point of journalism? What would be the point of having these papers? Part of what papers like this do are to keep our communities informed, but also encourage us to think. We could read Roger's articles or his editorials and Aaron's and Zach's, and we could just, okay, that's what we're supposed to think. Or we can read them and we can be challenged by them and we can say, yeah, no, I agree with that and this is why. Or I agree with part of it, but not this part and this is why. Or I totally don't agree with it, but he's made me think. He's given me something to think about. I think that's what we need to do with our lives. In order to live with integrity, we need to be willing to engage with thoughts and ideas that don't necessarily line up with ours, but which help us to what's the word I'm looking for? Help us to go back and forth with, to initiate conversation, to interact with others who don't have the same opinion as we do. Because what Roger has done here by sharing his opinion and then sharing someone who has a completely opposite opinion, he has modeled the value of having conversation, acknowledging and respecting another's ideas, and doing so without putting anyone down, without passing judgment, but by simply putting it out there and allowing people to listen, to read, to interpret, to make up their own minds, to ask questions. Isn't that what print media is meant to do? Isn't that indeed what Canadians have always done? We live in a world that is becoming more and more contentious, but we also live in a world that reminds us through things like this that we have good resources out there. And we need not worry, because as long as there's people like Roger Holmes and places like The Edge to feed us truth, to challenge our thoughts, to give us something to think about, we will always be in good stead. Have a great weekend. God bless you, and I will see you on Sunday for our wee parish mini worship, and on Monday for Church at Home with Rachael. Have a great one, everybody.